Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Adam Elwan, and I will be your moderator today. The European chemicals legislation, REACH, strives for a balance, increase our understanding of the hazards of chemicals, whilst at the same time avoiding unnecessary testing on animals. Learning more about chemicals by testing them on animals is a last resort under REACH. Registrants may only carry out new tests when they have exhausted all other relevant and available data sources. REACH offers several alternatives to testing on animals, and in today's webinar, we will show you how to meet the revised standard information requirements for REACH registration using alternative methods. The webinar will cover the following information requirements: skin corrosion and irritation, serious eye damage and eye irritation, skin sensitization, and acute toxicity. Today's agenda should be visible on your screens. During the webinar, you will be guided through information requirements and test methods under REACH, and you will learn from practical examples what to do in different situations depending on the available data. During the webinar, our panelists will answer your questions through the live chat. We expect several questions and may not be able to answer all of them during the webinar. If your question is not answered, you can submit it to your national help desk or to the ECHA help desk. Their contact information is available on our website, and you can find them using the link visible on your screens. Now, to make the webinar experience more enjoyable, remember that you can maximize the small video window, which should be visible in the top right corner of the screen, by double-clicking on it with your mouse. Pressing the Escape key on your keyboard will return you to the normal view. If you experience any difficulties with the webinar tool, you can contact our technical support team also through the Q&A panel. This webinar will be recorded and published on our website shortly after the event. All the material we present to you today is available on ECHA's webpage. So it's now time for our first presentation, Using Alternative Methods to Meet Your Information Requirements, presented by Kimmo Louekkari from ECHA. Kimmo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Kimmo Louekkari and I work in the evaluation unit in ECHA, and I will cover in this presentation the way of using alternative methods to meet REACH information requirements. As registrants, you may often wonder what kind of data you can use in your submission, in your registration, and we aim to give answers to your questions in this presentation. Recently, many of the REACH annexes have been revised, and it's important for you to understand what these revisions mean. The information requirement now often goes to the in vitro methods instead of the old traditional in vivo methods that have been used for decades. And the use of alternative methods and approaches to meet your information requirements is the focus of this presentation. Animal tests have traditionally been used to study the toxicity of chemicals and to regulate them. Even now, for many endpoints, that is the case, but for several lower tier endpoints, in vitro tests offer a very useful alternative currently. Classification, labeling, and the risk management also is based on animal studies in many cases even today. More alternatives have become available. In vitro tests can be recommended for example, for these three endpoints: skin corrosion, irritation, to test serious eye damage, eye irritation, or to test for skin sensitization. But in addition to in vitro methods, you can explore whether QSAR or read-across or human data can be used to meet your information requirements. Often proper justification needs to be provided together with this kinds of information. The REACH Annex revisions were effective May this year for irritation, skin and eye irritation, corrosion, and for acute toxicity, especially via the dermal route. While the Annex revisions for skin sensitization, that also concerns you, only will be approved later today. The information requirements which are affected by these recent revisions are, as I already started, on skin corrosion irritation, on serious eye damage eye irritation, acute toxicity, especially dermal root, and skin sensitization. And that will be the content of this presentation. Now let's go to the first revised part of Annex VII. Annex VII concerns substances which are registered between 1 and 10 ton per year. What is important here is that at this tonnage, no in vivo testing is needed after this REACH Annex revision. And in addition, there are ways to waive even the in vitro testing. So for substances which are strong acids or alkalines, no testing is needed because they can be classified, they will be irritant or corrosive, and substances which are spontaneously flammable or substances that are classified for acute toxicity for dermal root, also for these kind of substances, no testing is needed. And finally, if acute toxicity via dermal root did not reveal any skin irritation up to the limit dose level, no further testing is needed. Now, when going to the in vitro testing, it may be possible that one in vitro test is sufficient for you. That will depend on the result. And my colleague Laura Rossi will provide examples on so-called top-down or bottom-up approaches to the in vitro testing. The most relevant test methods are listed here. They have all been OECD approved and EU approved. What is important here is that you can stop testing at this level only when no effect was seen, and therefore no classification is necessary. If you see an effect in any of these tests, then you still don't know whether the substance is category 1 or category 2, and therefore skin corrosion testing is needed to find which category is the correct one, Cat 1 or Cat 2. Here you see the in vitro methods for skin corrosion. There are many, and most of them are approved by OECD and EU. Not all of them. Some are only OECD approved. What is important here is that these tests then enable you to classify to all relevant categories, either no classification or Cat 1A or Cat B/Cat 1C. So this will be the definitive step of your very small testing strategy for skin irritation and corrosion. Then we move to the next revised annex of REACH. This is Annex VII for serious eye damage and eye irritation. Again here, the most important thing to be kept in mind is that no in vivo test is needed at this tonnage. And this is important because Annex VIII will look a bit different, as I will explain a bit later. Basically, same type of adaptations and waivers can be used also for serious eye damage and irritation. So, for example, substances which are strong acid or alkaline don't need to be tested. Mostly the list that you see in column 8.2 on the right-hand side is similar with that for skin irritation corrosion. So there will be some available information that makes the testing unnecessary. Both in vitro and in vitro testing unnecessary. But this will not, of course, cover all of the substances. So let's consider what is the tricky point here. Now the in vitro methods unfortunately only identify substances that are either not to be classified or classified with category 1. So category 2 substances, they cannot be covered with the in vitro methods yet. But at this tonnage, no in vivo test still is necessary, only at the next tonnage level, according to Annex VIII, then and between 10 and 100 tons per year, the in vivo test is needed if the classification cannot be concluded. The relevant tests are listed here. Again, they are OECD approved, all of them, and most of them have also been approved by EU. And as said, they enable you only to classify with category 1 or not classify at all. Here we just shortly mention some other test methods, but ECHA doesn't really recommend the use of these because they have not been approved by OECD or EU. Now, the next important endpoint that is relevant for all substances registered under REACH is skin sensitization. And the recent changes, the recent progress in the test method area and in the REACH guidance is maybe most fundamental and most comprehensive here. The fundamental change is that previously only the in vivo test was available for you as a registrant. Now we have 3 methods, in vitro methods, that I will describe in more detail a bit later. But to start with, the aim here, as you probably can see, is to make a distinction between strong skin sensitizers. Here in the annex text it says to produce significant sensitization in humans, which means category 1A, and those substances need to be identified independent of whether in vivo or in vitro tests are used. Some concepts are here explained in the note with the blue highlight. So in vitro, once more, so that refers to animal-free tests, and usually in vitro tests are done in cell cultures or tissue samples. In chemical refers to reactivity or other properties of the compounds, and in case of skin sensitization, in chemical refers to peptide binding. That is one of the mechanistically important steps in the skin sensitization effect. Let's spend a little more time in the key concepts here in the area, and know that 3 skin sensitization methods have been approved by OECD recently, and as given in the guideline, they each correspond to a key event in that effect, namely skin sensitization. With the key event, we mean a step in the phase of a toxic mechanism, of a toxic event. And with an adverse outcome pathway, we mean a structured representation of those key events. So adverse outcome pathway is in another word, is the toxic mechanism as whole and steps that it involves. Now here are the relevant 3 key events and the test methods. The first is about interaction of the test substance with skin proteins. So that is necessary, first of all, to cause skin sensitization. Also, an inflammatory response in keratinocytes is a relevant key event, and there's a specific test for that. And finally, activation of dendritic cells belongs to testing, and it belongs to the adverse outcome pathway. For all these steps, there is now an OECD test method, and 2 of the tests have also been approved by EU. In combination, they can in some cases enable you to characterize the substance, but as I will explain a bit more closely, they will not be sufficient for all substances. Now we go back to Annex VIII revisions. What is important here is to note that for eye irritation, no suitable in vitro tests are available, and therefore, if category 2 cannot be addressed properly, then in vivo test is still needed at this tonnage. The waivers in the right-hand column here are mostly similar as those that I already covered. Then very shortly we want to mention that acute dermal toxicity part of Annex has been revised, and the most important change is that if the substance has been characterized for acute oral toxicity sufficiently or by other non-testing data, then the acute dermal toxicity is not required. And then, while there has been no annex revision on acute oral toxicity, ECHA will introduce an adaptation possibility for you as a registrant. So, in case you have a substance that indicated no toxic effect in the subacute oral toxicity test, you may consider this adaptation. And if you do, you should give it in the weight of evidence approach and provide also at least one additional piece of information to this subacute oral toxicity test. We have found a prediction model using our Euclid database, and now that is given in the updated ECHA guidance to you to consider. In vitro test is now the default for all three endpoints listed here and mentioned already many times before. So you should always start with the in vitro test methods. And in case the methods are not suitable for your substance, there are specific limitations in these test guidelines. And in case you find your substance doesn't fit into the scope of the test method, then only you should trigger in vivo testing. Also, if you cannot classify or do risk assessment based on the in vitro results, you should use the in vivo method as a last resort. Now let's go back to the potency estimation of the skin sensitizers. That will really pose quite challenge to many of the registrants. That is what ECHA can anticipate. So as explained, according to Annex, you need to consider the potency estimation. There are two potency categories. The substances will either be categorized with Cat 1A or Cat 1B. And unfortunately, the local lymph node activity in vivo study will, in most cases, enable you to do that classification correctly, whereas these three in vitro methods corresponding to key events that I explained, they will not always enable subcategorization, so the potency estimation of the sensitizers. And that is why, as a last resort, the in vivo test, the LLNA, will have to be used in those cases. There will, however, be cases also where the in vitros consistently show negative effect, show no effect, and then you should be able to rely on three negative in vitro results, not classify, and stop testing there and submit these in vitro test results in your Euclid, together with the kind of weight of evidence summary added to it. The formal exemption from this potency estimation requirement, and this is also given in the annex, is that if you have an old in vivo study, for example, guinea pig maximization test or Buller test, as given in the guideline here in the last bullet point, you are not required to do any further testing. That available data, in vivo data, will be considered sufficient because ECHA don't want to induce new unnecessary testing, especially not new unnecessary animal testing. Then finally, some tips from us to you as registrant. So please check the suitability and scope of all the in vitro methods that you aim to use for your registration. We have a designated website for you, and we have listed all new OECD in vitro methods and their limitations in this site. And in case your substance does not fit into the scope of these in vitro methods, then in vivo test should be performed as a last resort. Further tips to you: If you have more than one in vitro result, as you will have for skin sensitization, for example, then please provide separate study records in your Euclid and give a conclusion on your hazard endpoint as a weight of evidence approach in a proper place of Euclid, where you explain your conclusion based on the individual study results. So let's have an overview on the testing strategy as we foresee it. As REACH requires, you should always gather the existing data first before any testing. And there will be cases when the existing data already enables you to make a weight of evidence and correctly classify the substance. If that's the case, then no further testing is needed. If you cannot conclude your weight of evidence and your hazard characterization at that point, then further data is needed. And as many times said, that further data first should be in vitro whenever possible. After you have in vitro test results, you again do a weight of evidence and see whether substance can be characterized, whether substance can be correctly classified. If yes, you stop testing. If not, you go further to in vivo testing, which will always give a definitive answer for that toxic endpoint. Concluding remarks to you then. A number of in vitro tests have been accepted recently, and we have carefully analyzed them in ECHA, and we have guided you on how to use them under REACH. And our updated guidance will give very detailed, comprehensive explanation on how to use them correctly. In addition to in vitro tests, there will be QSAR and grouping approaches that are possible in particular cases for you. But always please examine first whether non-animal testing, non-animal approaches can be used instead of standard in vivo test. We anticipate that a little bit depending on the endpoint, but that in many cases the alternatives will be an option for you, and you will be able to meet the information requirement with alternatives. Most detailed and practical guide is given here. It's called the Practical Guide How to Use Alternatives to Animal Testing to Fulfill Your Information Requirements for REACH, and the link is provided in this presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kimmo. So, remember that you should always start by examining the possibility of meeting your information requirements with non-animal testing or other data. We now move on to using these alternative methods in your REACH registration. Laura Rossi from ECHA will present 6 case studies based on practical examples. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. My name is Laura Rossi, and I also work in the evaluation unit in ECHA. So my presentation is a little bit different, so I will go through some practical examples as a case studies and trying to explain what you need to do depending what type of information you have in hand. So here's the outline of the presentation, and all of these case studies that I will present are linked with the Annex revision as mentioned by Kimmo in his presentation. The first case study is about extreme pH and how you can use that information in your REACH dossiers. So in case your substance has an extreme pH, such as pH of 12, there are multiple column 2 adaptations that you can use. For example, for skin corrosion irritation, serious eye damage eye irritation, skin sensitization, and acute dermal and inhalation toxicity. However, in order for you to use this column 2 adaptation, this means that you have to classify your substance for skin corrosion. And if you have done so, no testing is needed for these endpoints. One issue that I would like to note that in case your substance is used in non-corrosive or non-irritating concentrations, and you have a concern on the skin sensitization potential, you can still perform in vitro in chemical testing at suitable concentrations to assess the skin sensitization potential. However, it's good to note that this is not a formal information requirement. Then to the next case study concerning existing in vivo studies. So as a starting point, you have an existing in vivo data available. And as Kimmo already mentioned in his presentation, there has been several changes in the information requirements, which means that in vitro testing shall be provided. But what to do when you have an in vivo test data? So there are some rules that you need to consider in order to pass the technical completeness check. Here I would like to highlight that the technical completeness check is an automated process, and if you have passed that, it doesn't necessarily mean that your substance is compliant with REACH. So basically what you need to do is to submit an adaptation for not giving the in vitro data, and this has to be done in a separate endpoint study record. An adaptation could be, for example, that you have an existing good quality in vivo data available. If you have done the adaptation as a separate endpoint study record, then you have to submit a second endpoint study record where you explain and provide the results of the in vivo test data. One thing that I would like to note here is that for skin corrosion irritation and serious eye damage eye irritation, in vitro testing was already mandatory since REACH entered into force. And also when looking at the skin sensitization, if you have done an in vivo study, that needs to be performed or initiated before the new Annex requirement enters into force. So in case you have done an in vivo test after these deadlines, you might need to adapt your justification for performing the in vivo test data. Then to the next case study about skin corrosion irritation. In case you don't have any existing information available for your substance, one thing that you need to do in the beginning is to consider what are the presumed properties of your substance in order for you to design your testing strategy. So for example, if you think your substance might be corrosive to the skin, you should start with the top-down approach. This means that you should do the skin corrosion test first. In case you get a positive result, you should classify your substance for skin corrosion, and there is no need to do any further testing. However, if the result is negative, meaning that the substance is non-corrosive in the test system, you would still need to assess whether your substance is irritating to the skin or non-irritating to the skin. And this you can do by performing the in vitro skin irritation test. Then, depending what result you get from that test, if the test result is positive, you should classify a substance for skin irritation and no further testing is needed. And in case you get a negative result, no classification is needed, your substance is considered to be non-irritating to the skin and no further testing is needed. In reverse, if you think your substance is not irritating to the skin, you should start with the bottom-up approach. This means that you should do the in vitro skin irritation test first, and depending on the result, if you get a negative result, you don't need to classify your substance and there is no need to do any further testing. However, if you get a positive result, this means that your substance could still be corrosive to the skin or irritating to the skin, and in order to assess that, you have to perform an in vitro skin corrosion test. If you get a negative result from that test, meaning that the substance is not corrosive in the test system, you should classify your substance for skin irritation and no further testing is needed. And in case you get a positive result, you should classify your substance for skin corrosion, and in this case also no further testing is needed. Then to the next case study. This is about eye irritation. So what I would like to go through here is one test method and what are the possible outcomes. This bovine corneal opacity and permeability test method is a little bit similar to the isolated chicken eye test in that sense that you can get similar outcomes from that assay as well. The other adopted test methods, they are limited in that sense that they can only provide you with one outcome. For example, whether your substance is causing serious eye damage or whether no classification is required. So basically in this BCOP assay, you measure your outcome based on these in vitro irritation scores. So in case the outcome of your IVIS is 3 or less, you don't need to classify a substance for eye irritation and no further testing is needed for this endpoint. In case the IV score is above 55, you should classify your substance for serious eye damage and no further testing is needed. However, if the IV score is above 3 or 55 or less, this means that you have obtained inconclusive results. So your substance can still be causing serious eye damage, eye irritation, or is not irritating to the eyes. And therefore further testing is needed by first performing additional in vitro test or as a last resort an in vivo test for the eye irritation. Then I will move towards the example cases about skin sensitization. So if you have a starting point that you have no existing data available for your substance, what we recommend you to do is to use the QSAR toolbox. This is due to the fact that this QSAR toolbox can help you to identify existing in chemical, in vitro, and in vivo data for your substance. It can be used to identify skin sensitization specific alerts, predict and characterize of metabolic and abiotic transformation products, and identification of potentially suitable analogues with existing data to be used in a read-across approach. One useful thing is to note that if you find a suitable analogue with local lymph node assay data and EC3 value, this might also provide you useful information in assessing the skin sensitization potency together with other information. As Kimmo already mentioned in the previous presentation, that the potency assessment will become mandatory once the new annexes enter into force. So in case you need to generate new data, there are a few issues that I would like to highlight here. These examples are hypothetical examples. The in vitro methods that we have currently validated and adopted, they are not meant to be used as a standalone assays, but together with additional information, which might be from other in vitro tests or information from other sources. One thing that you have to consider that the test method that you are going to be used, that it's suitable for your substance because the test methods do have some limitation related to their applicability domains. Also, as these test methods are not meant to be used as a standalone assays, you always have to apply a weight of evidence approach, which means that assessment of this information will require some expert judgment. So when you have to generate new data, as mentioned according to the new Annex revision, the testing must start with in-chemical in vitro methods, and you have to cover a sufficient number of key events in order to fulfill the information requirements. There are some aspects when you can adapt from not performing the in-chemical in vitro test, and for them, if the methods are not suitable for your substance or the results are not suitable for classification and labeling and risk assessment, then you have to perform in vivo testing with the local lymph node assay. However, when you do the in vivo test, you have to provide a justification why you are doing that assay. So here is a simplified flowchart what you need to do when you start generating data with the in vitro method. As Kimmo explained under REACH, you have to do these preparatory steps to look if you have existing information available. Then when you see that no existing data is available, you have to look first which type of adopted and or validated test methods are available and are they suitable for your substance. When you have found such assays, you should start generating data for one of the key events. That can be for key event 1 or key event 2 or key event 3. When you get the result of the test, you have to look if the results are conclusive on their own or together with the existing data. And as I mentioned previously, currently available in vitro data are not meant to be used as a standalone assays, but in the future there might become some new test methods that could be used as a standalone methods. So basically when you get the result, you consider, do you have enough information or not to conclude on the classification and labeling of the substance and to do the risk assessment? If not, then you have to generate data for another endpoint. Based on the results, you have to do a consideration again. Do you have enough information or do you need some additional information to conclude on the endpoint? If not, you would need to generate data for a third key event and then do this weight of evidence assessment again If you can conclude, you can classify accordingly or choose to use no classification if the results indicate that the substance is not a skin sensitizer. In case you cannot conclude based on these results, you need to generate data by using the local lymph node assay and classify according to the CLB criteria, including the potency assessment, or consider no classification. So now I will go through to more specific case studies on skin sensitization. As a starting point, there was no data available in the QSAR toolbox, and no suitable analogues were found that could be used as a standalone in a read-across. So therefore, new data is needed. So 3 in vitro test methods were done, and all of them resulted in negative predictions, so indicating that the substance is not a skin sensitizer. However, the test methods that we currently have available, either they don't have any metabolic capacity or they only have limited metabolic capacity. So the challenge here is that might your substance have a metabolite that could have skin sensitizing properties? So how could you address that? There is, for example, this expert system called TimesSS available that looks for skin-specific metabolites. So this was run for this hypothetical case study substance. Some metabolites were identified, but those metabolites didn't show any concern for the skin sensitization. So what to do now? Basically, you have now obtained information from 4 different information sources that basically all consistently show that there is no skin sensitization potential. So then you have to build up a weight of evidence approach based on all of these 4 information sources, and then you can conclude that your substance is not a skin sensitizer and no further testing is needed, either in vitro or in vivo. Then to the next case study. Here again, it was decided that in vitro testing had to be performed. So these 3 methods were performed and they were suitable for the substance, and all indicated that the substance is causing skin sensitization. But the challenge here is how to consider the skin sensitization potency. So would the substance be causing strong sensitization leading to category 1A, or would it be a moderate sensitizer leading to category 1B? The problem with the in vitro assays are that the results cannot be used directly to derive the potency. However, one might get some indication about the potency from those assays. For example, the DPRA assay, for the positive results, you can grade them into 3 different reactivity grades, from low reactivity to high reactivity. In this hypothetical case study, the substance was positive with the low reactivity. In the next 2 assays, in keratinosense and HCLAT, one uses several different concentrations, so you can get out dose response information that might be useful in assessing the potency. In this case study, the substance was non-cytotoxic, so one could test with really high concentrations, and the inductions thresholds that lead to the positive prediction were only met with the highest concentration tested. So that would also indicate towards that your substance might not be a strong sensitizer. But as I mentioned earlier, you cannot use these results directly to derive the potency, so some additional information is needed. So then a search in the QSAR toolbox was done, and 1 analog substance was found having local lymph node assay data with EC3 value, clearly indicating that that read-across substance, even though not really perfect, would be a moderate skin sensitizer. Note also that in case read-across is used in your submission, you have to provide a read-across justification. So basically, when you look at all of these 4 information sources that have been used, they all indicate that the substance would be a moderate skin sensitizer. So therefore, when a weight of evidence was built, the substance was classified as category 1B and no further testing is needed. Then to the 3rd case study on skin sensitization. In this case study, no existing data was noted, and when the substance was run through expert system, there were a little bit inconsistent results related to whether there might be a concern for skin sensitization or not. So then the next challenge was that can you use those in vitro methods for your substance to assess the skin sensitization potential? So this hypothetical substance is a UVCB, meaning that you don't know exactly what are the ratios of your substance within that substance. As for the DPRA assay, you need to know exactly how much and what type of substance you have in that mixture. You cannot use this assay. Also, the substance has a high log KOW, and the suitability for the ECHA test method is questionable, because if you have a log KOW above 3.5, you cannot accept the negative results. Only the positive results can be accepted. Also, the substance is not soluble in water or in DMSO, so therefore the substance cannot be used in the keratinosense assay. So based on this, as the in vitro testing methods are not suitable for your assay, in vivo testing needs to be performed. However, when you submit your dossier, you have to provide a justification why in vitro testing was not performed, and then submit the in vivo results. Then to the last case study on skin sensitization, existing in vivo study. So as a starting point, you have an existing guinea pig test data. That might be a guinea pig maximization test or Buehler test with a positive result. The induction values and incidences such as that category 1B might be suitable according to the CLB criteria. And as this test was done before the new annex entered into force, you can use this assay to fulfill the information requirement. The challenge here is about consideration of the correct classification. Although the criteria in the CLP for classification as category 1B are fulfilled, the classification for category 1A may not be excluded due to the high incidences at high doses noted. So what do you need to do, or what can you do? You can use the ECHA toolbox or other information sources to confirm whether the Cat 1B classification of moderate skin sensitization is actually correct. However, if you cannot find any other supporting information, you should choose category 1 classification as specified in the CLP regulation. Then to the last case study on acute toxicity. As a starting point, you have a subacute oral toxicity test and no effects were noted. So the subacute oral toxicity test is referring to the 28-day study. Also, you have some other existing information that shows that your substance is of low toxicity. So what to do? You can build a weight of evidence adaptation based on this information, and you can waive the in vivo acute oral toxicity test. Because now you have covered the acute oral toxicity test based on the weight of evidence approach, you don't need to do acute dermal toxicity test independent of the tonnage band. So here are some links for you where you can find additional information on practical guides, ECHA guidance documents. And when this presentation is published, you can just click on the links and you will be directed to the correct place. Thank you for your attention.
That concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and to our panelists and presenters. If you do not receive an answer to your question by the time the webinar ends, please resubmit it to your National Help Desk or to our ECHA Help Desk. Remember that you will be able to find a recording of the webinar and further support material on our webpage. Now, if you haven't already done so, I recommend subscribing to our news and our social media channels from our homepage to stay up to date. So I hope you found the webinar useful. When the webinar closes, you will be automatically redirected to a short feedback questionnaire. Please take the time to share your comments and suggestions so that we can further develop our webinars to meet your needs. Our next webinar will take place on 4th of October. It is called Prepare Your Registration as a Euclid Dossier. This is the 5th webinar in a series focusing on practical advice to successfully register by the REACH 2018 deadline. If you're registering a substance for the first time and want to know how to use Euclid to create a registration dossier, then this webinar is intended for you. So thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again in one of our upcoming webinars.